And welcome to today's webinar, Cyber Made Simple. Hi, I'm Dave Nelson, Chairman of the Independent Insurance Producer Service Corp. That's IIABCal's for-profit subsidiary. With me today is Michael Palatay, Senior Vice President of Underwriting for NAS Insurance. And as you know, NAS Insurance and Swett Crawford are IIABCal's endorsed program partners for the association's NetGuard plus Cyber Liability program. Now just remember, for today's webinar, we have muted all your phones to eliminate background noises. However, you can ask questions throughout the webinar in writing through the right-hand box of the go-to meetings. All your questions will be addressed at the end of the meeting. So Michael, please enlighten us on cyber liability.
Okay, I'll try, Dave. Thanks a lot. Thank you everyone for joining. Today we're going to cover the following topics. I'm going to do a quick introduction. I'm going to go over kind of some of the latest cyber in the news. I'm going to discuss how cyber liability, while in the news, is usually a lot of really, a Fortune 500 type problem. The reality is many companies of all sizes have a significant exposure to this issue. Next, I'm going to go into the meat of the presentation and go through a step-by-step guide to how to discuss cyber with your clients. Then I'm going to quickly go over the insurance solution, and I'm going to open it up for questions. Please don't be shy, and please ask some questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Okay. Just a quick thing here about NAS. NAS is an independent underwriting manager of specialty insurance, providing innovative solutions for the past 30-plus years. We handle the underwriting, risk management, marketing, training, and claims support for all the business that we write. We're what's known as a Lloyd's cover holder, mainly, which means that the policies that we issue are on behalf of the Lloyd's of London. They have given us the pen, in essence. And always with NAS, you have direct contact with underwriting and claims. This is me. I'm the Senior Vice President of Underwriting at NAS, specializing in cyber liability. I've been here for 6 years, and no one else cares. No one cares. No one else. Okay, about the program. So IIABCal, in conjunction with Swett Crawford and NAS, have put together a streamlined cyber liability product that is available online and was negotiated for preferential rates and enhancements. The online system features a very simple 8-question application. It also features a Ballpark ability, which really only asks 2 questions in order to provide a ballpark indication for cyber liability. Minimum premiums are as low as $500 and include some exclusive coverages like Brand Guard, which is a reputational harm coverage, that are very that most carriers do not offer out there in the marketplace. Okay, in our increasingly digital world, an organization's data can be a valuable asset. Unfortunately, this asset can also turn into a significant and costly liability that falls in the wrong hands. We hear a lot about data breaches, but what exactly is a data breach? What it is a breach is defined as an event in which an individual name plus social security number, driver's license number, medical record, or a financial account number is potentially put at risk and the information is compromised. This can be in either an electronic or paper format. When this information is improperly released, most states require that the affected people be notified of the breach. This is to make sure that the customers, the consumers, are aware that their information was put at risk, and they can monitor their credit and make sure nothing unusual has happened. Since 2005, there have been over 4,000 reported privacy breaches, exposing over 600 million confidential records. We're getting some feedback, so whoever's else on the line, please mute your phone. Okay, the average cost of a data breach in 2013 was $3.5 million. Some other things in the news, especially recently, we've got a Home Depot breach, the size of which is still unknown, but there's already multiple class action lawsuits against Home Depot and numerous regulatory investigations. UPS had 51 stores affected. Super Value Markets, which is another really recent one, had 180 stores breached. The number of records that were accessed is still unknown. In 2013, the Identity Theft Resource Center documented over 600 data breaches in the U.S., including Target, which is the one that is very fresh in our minds, with 110 million records compromised. Target purchased $100 million in cyber liability coverage, and all that limit was exhausted in the first few weeks. Neiman Marcus lost over 1 million records. Coca-Cola, St. Joseph Health System, University of Maryland. This is a daily. It almost feels like a daily occurrence that there is a large breach in the news. While the news stories are dominated by the large companies like Home Depot or UPS, it's really not just a big company problem. Certainly not. The cyber crimes are definitely, criminals are definitely targeting smaller companies too. 36% of all targeted accounts are directed at businesses with 250 or fewer employees. 44% of small businesses reported their business has been struck by a cyber attack. Many cyber attacks happen from automated malicious code, where the virus gets access to a secure system and just sends data back to the creator. This is really important to understand because it means that a hacking attack doesn't, an actual hacker, I mean, imagine someone in a basement in China or Russia or somewhere. That person doesn't actually have to be targeting a small business, right? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. A lot of small businesses don't think that they have much of an exposure because they don't think they'll ever be targeted. But many breaches happen from automated viruses that send data back to their creator, and then the creator will, the person that wrote the virus will use that data to perpetuate, credit card fraud. They might try to extort the small business in exchange for not releasing the information. So that's an important thing to understand. Some other facts here. So in 2013, Forrester Research found that 36% of all breaches stemmed from inadvertent misuse of data by employees. What that really means, and the point there is, a lot of times it's not a hacker that's actually causing a breach. A lot of times it's just a mistake, just an inadvertent mistake by one of your employees, whether it be leaving a laptop on the train or dumping patient records in the dumpster behind the medical group. 25% of respondents said that abuse by a malicious insider was the most common way in which a breach occurred in the past year. It's very difficult to protect your system from an employee who has all of the passwords and the keys. So that's an important point. Employee negligence is the #1 risk of data loss. Opening infected email attachments, leaving your computer unlocked, using password for your computer password. All of those things can cause a data breach, a very expensive one. And lastly here, business associates have been implicated in 21% of the 571 breaches affecting 500 or more individuals. So that's business associates, for those that aren't dealing with HIPAA a lot, are companies that are contractually working with healthcare providers, and in providing whatever service they are collecting private information from the healthcare provider and are supposed to keep that data safe. And a lot of times they fail to do that, and it causes an embarrassing cyber breach. With all of the cyber breaches in the news and a big increase in the cyber liability insurance market, it's still very much, for the most part, an untapped opportunity. According to an Advisen study, that showed that many potential insureds will choose to skip purchasing the coverage. Only 25% of large companies, meaning $5 billion in revenue, reported purchasing coverage. So that's still a really low amount, but that's obviously those companies are really, really large. Now that number drops to 10% for companies, for the kind of more middle market companies, and drops even further to 4% for companies with $2.5 million in revenue or less. Why is this? The main thing here is a lack of understanding about the potential loss and a misguided belief that it can't happen to them. I mean, many companies don't really understand that while they're small and they only might store 10,000 customer records or something, they don't really understand how much that will actually cost if the information is lost, or they grossly underestimate it. And this other thing about misguided belief that it can't happen to them, I mean, that's a very classic reason why people don't buy the insurance. But the fact is that there's tons of breaches happening all the time, and a lot of time, and especially to small businesses, not just the large guys. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to get into our 5 steps to introducing cyber liability coverage with your insureds. And the 5 steps quickly here are: discuss data exposures, identify number of customer and other confidential records that the insured stores, explain the cost of the data breach. Why do these data breaches cost so much money? It's important for the insured to understand that so they can decide whether to purchase the coverage or not. The 4th thing here is review causes of data breaches. And then the 5th step, the last step, is present the coverage. You really need to build understanding and value for what the coverage is going to protect you from before really talking about the policy. Okay, getting right into this. Step 1, discuss data privacy exposures. So in this step, it's important to get a feel for what your insured, what kind of data your insured stores. Do they store customer data, employee data? For how long is it stored? How is it protected? Is it backed up? How is the backup secure? Is it encrypted? Who has access to this data? Basically, you want to ask a bunch of questions to get a good feel for what kind of exposure the insured has. Some insureds will have very little private information, and this will hopefully identify that, and they might not be a candidate that needs a lot of cyber coverage, and that's okay. But most companies have employee information, customer information, credit card information. So it's really important to kind of get into the details. So it also helps because the insured will start thinking about what information they're storing and how is it protected, and that's a good first step. You want to leave this step with a clear understanding of what they have, what kind of information, and how it's backed up and stored. Step 2, determine a rough quantity of confidential records. Basically, you want to understand how many individual records a company stores. Now, that isn't just number of transactions. That's how many individual people information that they are storing. When there's a breach, the vast majority of the loss is usually centered around the breach response process. So when there's a breach, most states require that you notify all of the people that were affected. Usually you offer credit monitoring and you offer all these other services. That is a known cost. And based on our experience, NAS's experience, and we're handling hundreds of claims a year, and other industry research, claims data, and all of that, just the cost to respond to a data breach is $10 to $20 per record. And that's a pretty consistent cost. I mean, it might fluctuate a little. It might fluctuate, but and I do want to make sure that everyone understands that these numbers are not set in stone. They will not fit every single circumstance, but they are a good average. So using averages, once you know the number of records at the insured stores, you can start getting a rough idea of how much it will cost just to respond to a data breach if they lose all this information. So for instance here, once you've got the number of records, and this could be number of patient records if they're a healthcare provider, or it could be a number of credit card numbers that they store if they're a retailer, or it could be a payroll processing company, and we'd have to figure out how many identities they store there. Once you have that number, and it could be, a rough estimate is fine. You want to multiply that number by $20, and that gives you the insured's estimated cost to respond to a data breach. Now, obviously, this is a very rough estimate. It will not apply to every single situation, but it is a good rule of thumb. The next step is to explain costs of a data breach. This step is really important because once you start telling the insured how much a breach is going to cost in total based on the number of records, a lot of times they will be surprised. A lot of times they will think, well, we're just a small medical group, or we're just a small, mom and pop retailer. And then you say, well, they're storing 20,000 records, and then multiply that by 20 equals $400,000 in exposure. They're going to be surprised, and many of them might not believe that that's what can happen. So it's important to substantiate why that costs so much. So here are the various things that go into responding to a data breach. So I'm just going to run through kind of just a basic scenario. So a retailer discovers that they had a data breach. There was a virus in their point-of-sale machines, their credit card processing machines, and they don't know how many records have been lost yet. So the first step, and this is, by the way, this is what happened to Target on a much larger scale. But the first step that they'll need to do is to hire a lawyer who's going to help kind of what we call kind of quarterback the process with a breach coach. Basically, they help coordinate everything. They look at various state and local laws to see what the legal requirements are. Many times, especially in this scenario where they're not really sure how many records have been lost or how the information has been breached, the next step usually is to hire an IT forensics firm, which is a computer security specialist who will look through the data and the system and figure out what happened, what was accessed, how much information was lost, and all of that. And IT forensics, this is a tough cost to estimate because it's completely dependent on the circumstance. So it could be a really large company, and this could be hundreds of thousands of dollars for a company to figure things out, or it could be a small company, it could be a few $1,000s. The legal fees usually just cost, depending on the size, but we pay usually $5,000 to $10,000 to start, and then on a much larger breach, those costs will go up. Okay, so once the IT forensics team has done their job and figured out whose information has been lost, the next step is to notify these customers. That costs between about $2 per record for our vendors to put together the letter and send it to everyone with postage and certified mail and all of that. Usually you include some kind of remedy when you're telling your customers that you've lost their private information. So what is typically given is credit monitoring, and that gives typically a year of coverage for the customers to be able to monitor their credit and get alerts if any suspicious activity is happening. Credit monitoring costs $40 per person that signs up. So that would be a big cost, but in the reality is about 10 to 15% of the people that you notify on average choose to sign up for the credit monitoring. And you don't have to pay unless they sign up. Another thing to consider is a call center. On larger insureds, if they have a large breach, their current customer service staff cannot handle the influx of customers calling and trying to get more information about what they're supposed to do, what happened, and get all the information about the breach. So typically a call center is set up that helps disseminate the information and allow the company not to their operations to grind down to a halt when they're answering all the phones. And the last cost here is public relations. Very hard to estimate because it really depends on what's going on in the media. If it's a really large breach, obviously the PR costs are going to be a lot higher because you need to kind of try to salvage the goodwill as much as possible, and that costs money. But on many small breaches, we don't end up using public PR companies at all. Okay, so here's a claim example. An insurance consultant who's not typically a covered entity for HIPAA had a breach of secured private data because of a vulnerability of their web server. Much of the data on the server was unencrypted, and IT forensics was required to determine the extent of the breach. Legal counsel and IT security determined the notification was required, and as the information exposed included private health information. Call center was used to escalate inquiries, and credit monitoring was offered to the affected party. Although the breach only lasted a limited period of time, costs were significant because approximately 6,000 records were openly available on the internet, and each record contained information on more than one potentially affected party. The total breach response costs were $250,000. This was just a little insurance agent with, like, I think, if I remember correctly, about 10 or 11 million in revenue, and they had a pretty, costly breach. Another example is about a medical practice that loses a laptop. A laptop that was stolen that had 57,000 records, and unfortunately was not encrypted. Encryption is a really basic security control, but it really does reduce your exposure dramatically. Because a laptop that was encrypted, if that's lost, it's not technically considered a breach, because it's very unlikely that they'll be able to access the information. The medical group was required to publish a notice of the breach on their website and in local media. Additionally, the group was required to notify the OCR, or the Office of Civil Rights, of the breach, which led to an investigation. The OCR required a complete submission from the medical group outlining how they were in compliance with the various provisions of HIPAA. Basically, they ask you to provide a report that goes into what your compliance program was, did anything go wrong, what happened, what are you going to do to fix it, and all of that. And our counsel worked with the medical group to show proof of strong privacy controls and training procedures, and it resulted in the OCR closing its investigation. The estimated cost to respond to this breach was about $10 per record, or $370,000. The last claim example I have is was one that NAS handled, and it was a plastic surgeon posted unauthorized before and after photos of several patients on her website, and now their faces were blurred out, and there was obviously no names just on the picture. But unfortunately, the photos had what is called a meta tag, which helped the doctor keep track of the photos and who were who. But they didn't know that Google was able to see those tags on the pictures, which aren't visible, but they're part of the actual image file, and cataloged it for searching. So when a patient performed a Google search on themselves, they pulled up before and after pictures of their surgery. And we had 15, I think there's actually more of those claims now, but each one was settling in the range of $150,000 per plaintiff. So that's another thing that can happen. Okay, the next step is to review the causes of a breach with the insured. Now just to summarize, we've talked about what information they've stored. We've figured out how many records that they store and talked about how much it would cost to respond to a data breach based on the number of records. Then we've talked about why it costs so much, the various components of that, and hopefully explain to them why, shown them that the cost is actually a good estimate and not ridiculous. The next step is making sure is going into the various ways that they can suffer a privacy breach to make sure that they understand that it can happen to them because it can. Now, here are the 4 common causes of breaches you can quickly explain to your clients. Negligence, this is easily the most relatable. This is like the laptop stolen from the business owner's car or sensitive files being thrown into a dumpster. Currently, for NAS, this is how the majority of our claims are caused. The next one is rogue employees. It's a fact of life that all employers have to plan for. A disgruntled employee that wants revenge and has access to all the secure systems. It's like an IT director's or IT security expert's worst nightmare, just because they have, no matter how well planned and executed and designed the security system is, if you have the keys, it's pretty much irrelevant. Internal theft accounted for 11% of all breaches in 2013. Now, business associates, and we talked about that. Even if your insured has the best policies and procedures and security, if they're sharing their information with someone else, some other kind of third party, a vendor, a business associate, or whatever else, and that vendor has a breach, many times your insured will still have to be the one that does the notification. That's because, think for instance, for example, if you go to your general practitioner, your doctor, and you give them your private information. Now, they might be sharing that with a medical biller or an electronic health record database or someone else, but if that information is lost, regardless if it's from the medical biller or from the doctor is going to be the one that notifies their patients, because the patients don't know about these other vendors. They don't know that their information was sent there. So it's always on what we call the data owner, the one that actually accepted the information. Business associates accounted for 14% of all breaches in 2013. The last one here are hackers, and are obviously the most prevalent in the news. As we discussed already, businesses of all sizes are vulnerable to hackers. Whether it's a virus, an exploit, or other automated attack, there's a constant threat of a breach by those who seek to gain from your client's potential vulnerability. Another thing, a good thing to point out is, if hackers are able to break into the FBI and other highly secure networks, many small businesses are not going to be able to protect themselves. It's just simply not realistic to expect that. Hacking was the #1 cause of breach in 2013, with 25% of all breaches arising from a hacking attack. Okay. Lastly here, you want to present the insurance solution. You want to talk about the various coverages of the product, and reiterate again, and hopefully now with our system you can put together a ballpark indication, so you'll have a rough idea of how much the policy will cost when you have that discussion with your insured. Usually, for most insureds, when shown the price of the coverage compared to how much you have calculated their estimated exposure is if they have a data breach, buying the coverage is usually a no-brainer. A lot of times they'll have $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 in potential exposure, and then the policy will cost $3,000, and it'll be an absolute no-brainer for the insured to do that. So it's really about going through this framework to get to that stage. Again, just to reiterate, the estimate is just that. It's an estimate and not set in stone, and we will not be held responsible if that's not enough limit. Things can change. IT forensics could cost a lot more than expected. It could be there could be a lot of PR costs. Another thing to keep in mind is this is just the cost of responding to the data breach. It does not take into account at all defending against a regulatory action or a regulatory fine or penalty. It also doesn't take into account a third-party lawsuit. Now, these are all very difficult to estimate with any real accuracy because it's all very volatile and depending completely on the circumstances. But that's another important point. Lastly here, I'm just going to go over just a few advantages of purchasing cyber liability, some additional reasons. Risk transfer. A cyber breach can leave an unprotected organization financially crippled. Self-insurance a lot of times is not a reasonable approach for many small businesses because they simply cannot afford the cost of handling the breach correctly. Another thing is experienced claims handling. NAS and other cyber liability carriers handle hundreds of these breaches a year, and we know all of the top vendors, that we know the best way to respond to them, we know the best lawyers and all of that. So we know what works and what doesn't. Lastly, our risk management resources. Many data breach insurance products include a risk management component, and that can include sample policies, procedures, and other best practices that give the insured a big head start in developing their own comprehensive plan for managing cyber risk. Now, I don't think many really large Fortune 500 companies will find much use in these services, but smaller companies that don't have a whole security and policy framework to protect private information will get a lot of useful information from a risk management suite. Okay, for further information, this training, we have another version of this training at smarter.nasinsurance.com/cyber. This is the end of the Simplifying Cyber webinar, but I'm going to go into a quick discussion of the NAS online system. I do want to thank Swett Crawford, the program managers Pete Thrasher and Ann McCarthy, and the IIABCal for putting this on. Now, jumping right in order to use the NAS online system, if you have not registered already, you register online at www.iiabcal.org/cyber. You can see in the bottom right there'll be an account request form where we ask some basic information, and then once you send that in, our team here at NAS will sign you up to the system really quickly, and then we'll send you an email welcoming you and giving you instructions on how to log in. Once you have your username and password, you can log in at producer.wn.nasinsurance.com. This information will be emailed to you as well, I believe. You log in quickly here. The next thing you see are a bunch of tiles which show the various products that are available for ballparking, quoting, and binding online. The one that I want to talk about today is Ballpark. So we're going to click on that in our example here. And this is what you see next. And this is the really, what I think makes this platform so strong is it allows uninsured. When we designed this, we were really thinking about an insurance broker agent's workflow. And basically, we want to encourage and we want to make it really easy for an agent to include a Ballpark for cyber for all of their renewals. Basically, it gives the agent a great opportunity to cross-sell the coverage. So what we do is we understand that sometimes it's hard to get a new insured to fill out an application for a new coverage. So we give the agent tools to produce a Ballpark based on information that they most likely know already. They know the name of the insured. They know the type of coverage, or they know what they do. Right? The next question is type of coverage in business. This is where you basically describe what the business of the insured does, and then you put in the zip code, and then you hit Ballpark, and then it opens up and then it asks for a size factor. Basically, cyber liability is rated off revenues, so we need the revenues, which most agents should have for their insured. So you put in the revenue, and the system spits out a Ballpark indication. Now this is a screenshot of what you will see on the system, and it shows the limits, the deductibles, the premium, The system handles all the surplus lines, taxes, and fees, and all of that. And what I don't have a picture of, but what it does is this will produce. This is just what you see on the system. But when you hit save proposal, what it does is it spits out a few-page ballpark proposal that includes information on the program. It includes the indication, and it includes an application for them. So if they are interested in buying the coverage, we include a very short application. I think it's 6 or 7 questions for the insured to fill out. And then the agent would come back from that meeting, from that renewal meeting for their other lines, with hopefully a completed application. And then they would go onto the system and input it in and bind the coverage right there. So make it really easy. And another cool feature is once you ballpark an account, within the system you can go to My Submissions and you'll see the ballpark and you can hit Start Application. So a lot of the stuff will already be filled in for you from the information we collected at the ballpark and during the ballparking process. Okay, this concludes our webinar now, or at least my prepared comments. Next, we're going to do some Q&A.
Yeah, we have some questions here, but Michael, before we start, I just wanted to say that the ballpark and the use of your website is extremely easy to use, and our staff here, the account managers here, have started to use this. Again, it takes some time to get used to, putting something new in your routine, but I think when other agents out there start to see how easy this is and actually how can you also comment before we ask some other questions? So many carriers are now adding these little endorsements, these cyber liability endorsements, for peanuts onto the policy, and people think that they're getting the cyber liability coverage that they need. Maybe give a quick understanding of how this policy is going to be a much better enhancement than those endorsements.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a number of things. I mean, I could get into the nitty-gritty about the various coverages. I think the main point, though, to bring up is most of the add-on kind of endorsements that are being added to the GL policy or their BOP or their professional liability policy or whatever, usually the limits are very low. Either, we see $50,000, $100,000, which might be enough for some insured. There might be. I'm not trying to sell cyber to insured that don't need it, but many of them will have more exposure than the limits that they are being provided. That's the first point. The second point is, a lot of times, in my presentation, we talked a lot about breach response and how that is the most significant cost, and that's where a lot of the claims frequency is. Many times when you're getting cyber liability endorsed onto a policy, it is only covering lawsuits against you for a cyber breach, as opposed to the breach response, which I hope I've explained is the most significant portion of the coverage, and that's where a lot of the claims frequency is. So those are some of the points.
Yeah. Oh, I know that. Thanks, Michael. I just wanted to reiterate to people out there, they think that, oh, wow, on my Hartford Spectrum, I just added this endorsement. Now my insured is covered. They need to realize that they're not giving them all the coverage that they need. We have a few questions here. Here's the first question. If a restaurant swipes a credit card, does the restaurant store that info, or does the bank? Who is typically liable for that loss of the credit card info if it's stored at the bank?
Great. I think that's a great question. Now, I guess what's unfortunate is I'm going to have to say it depends, but I'll give you a couple scenarios. One, the first scenario is, I mean, most of these companies, most restaurants, retailers, whatever, they have point-of-sale machines that collect the credit card information, and those are talking to the banks and the credit card processing company. That's for sure happening. Now, some organizations, like I know grocery stores and some others, a lot of times are collecting that information also because it gives them some valuable data on their customers. So some companies choose to also store the credit card information that is being processed for the transaction. Many choose not to store all that information in one centralized place. Now, but Target, for instance, to my knowledge, was not storing all that information, but still had a massive data breach. And now, how did that happen? What happened was their point-of-sale machines, which Target owns, were breached and were compromised. So every time a customer swiped their credit card through the machine, it went to the payment processor, but it also went to a hacker somewhere. I don't know where they were. So the point is that while even if a company is not storing a bunch of information, they are responsible for data that's being collected on their premises and through their hardware and their network. So even if you're not storing anything, but if you allow something that your customers are using to compromise their information, you could have a massive loss, depending on how many records are lost. But Target had a ton, and it was not because a database was breached. It was because their point-of-sale machines had been compromised.
Great. Here's our next question. This one is on, and I'm not sure of this reference, but somebody says, does Ponymon, I don't know if you know that, estimate that the breach cost for U.S. companies for breaches less than 100,000 records are around $180 to $190 per record?
Sure, yeah. No, I am familiar with Ponymon. Now, the crucial thing about Ponymon is understanding what the various components of that number are. So roughly, this is from memory, but roughly a third of the cost is what we call direct costs, and 2/3 of that $180, $200 number, it varies every year, are indirect costs. So now, let's start with the direct costs. The direct costs include breach response, and they also include third-party claims. They also include regulatory claims and other kind of lawsuits. So when my $20 number was only talking about breach response, okay, and so that's $20 of the $60 that they say it costs. Now, a lot of their survey is with really large companies, and large companies, when they have a really large breach, do have considerable third-party losses because there's a class action lawsuit and they have to spend a lot of money defending against that. So that's the direct costs, right? So the direct costs are only a third of the $200 number. Now, the much bigger portion is the indirect costs. And the major component of the indirect costs, according to the Ponymon study, is lost revenue associated with a damaged reputation from the breach. So basically, Target saw, I think, and I don't know the number perfectly offhand, but it's something around 30 or 40% dip in revenue after this data breach hit the news, which is a massive decrease in revenue. Now that's because Target's brand was significantly damaged due to the breach. So that dip in revenue would be counted by Ponymon as an indirect cost. Now also, this is also one of the major distinguishing features about our product, because we have a coverage section called Brand Guard, which covers lost revenue associated with the damaged reputation arising from a data breach. So that's how that works.
All right. Well, we're running late on time. I'm going to ask one more question because we're getting many questions. So that's good that there's a lot of our listeners today are thinking about this coverage. So I'm going to ask one more question, and I just want to remind people out there to, if you've not signed up for, this very great coverage offered by NAS, that you should do today. Go to IIABCal and get registered for this, and also make it a routine in your renewal process to offer this coverage to your clients. Again, as an independent agent, one of our great things is that we're a cut above all the other agents out there, and it's important to continue to offer these important coverages. The final question that I have here is, does the coverage provide for both data and paper records? How about business interruption for the client?
Right. So I guess, Dave, I mean, I don't have anywhere to be until 11, so if you want to keep going, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll answer
Okay. As long as. Okay,
yeah,
we'll stay on here. We still have quite a few people that are still online. I'll continue to ask questions.
Yeah, so I don't mind.
Okay.
The policy covers So policy covers both online, both electronic and paper records. So that's definitely covered. And the policy also covers business interruption. The policy covers business interruption, and also the other first-party coverage we give is data loss. Basically, if your insured network goes down and that results in lost revenue, meaning they rely upon their network to do work and do their business, which most companies do, that will be covered. And another differentiating feature of ours is of our product is that instead of just hacking attacks, most of our competitors only cover business interruption if it was a result of a hacking attack. Ours covers it from negligence or any other kind of mistake or power outage or a lot of other additional triggers for the outage. So that's kind of a different thing.
Okay. Here's another question. What about these Foursquare devices a retailer will attach to their phones or tablets for credit cards? Is the retailer at risk on these?
That's a good question. That's difficult to say. I don't know all of the details about that. It depends. Now, if the information was breached from the retail location, I believe that it's still their responsibility to notify the people. But we are getting into like kind of a gray area at this stage. It depends now. Like I haven't heard of a Square machine being hacked and having the information sent off. That doesn't mean it's not possible, but I haven't heard of that. So it is a different situation. But it's tough to say. I mean, it's whenever you're collecting credit card information and processing payments, you do have some exposure because there is private information that is going through your business somehow. And if that is lost at your business, now if the payment processor loses it, usually the payment processor will indemnify the merchant. But if it happens at their site somehow, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to imagine. I don't know. I mean, if the iPad had a virus on it, I guess. But
I guess with maybe in a Wi-Fi environment that stuff can be taken.
Right.
Can you give us examples of how the stolen information is being used? I mean, these hackers get this information. Are there any examples of what's being done with this information?
Sure. On another presentation I have a screenshot of a chat room online where hackers are buying and selling credit card information for $1 a card. Basically, it's very easy to monetize credit card information online. Simple Google searches will kind of point you in the right direction. And what's more interesting is medical records are worth a lot more than $1 a credit card. I think they're worth like $25 or $30 because you have much more identifying information about the person that the hackers or the criminals can really steal their identities. They can open up new accounts and they can do all kinds of stuff with that record. But basically what they do is they use the card, they use the information to perpetuate some kind of fraud. I mean, I've had my credit card information stolen, and somehow a gas station in New Jersey charged me $3,000 on my card somehow. And they didn't even have my card. I had the card, but the information had been stolen, and they can clone a card and they could use it. And then there's merchants that are in on it that are charging big amounts of money. And that's just one scam. There's also the figuring out a place to send merchandise, whether it be an abandoned home or something else like that, and then using stolen cards to send big screen TVs and other high worth electronics to the house. And then they take that they take the stuff and they sell it on the black market. Those are just a couple things. I don't want to teach everyone on the call how to do credit card fraud.
Yeah. Great. We got another question here. At the beginning, you said that breach response cost is outside the limit. However, you later said that to estimate limit, you need to take the estimated costs to respond times and the records to determine the limit. Please explain.
Sure. What I mean is, with our policy includes breach response costs outside the limit, but there's still a limit. So basically, if you have $1 million aggregate cyber policy and you have $1 million of breach response, on our policy, that $1 million will not erode the aggregate limit, but there is still a limit of a limit where for that coverage. So in this example, you could have a breach of 100,000 records or whatever, and lose the $1 million in breach response, and so you hit the limit, and our policy will stop paying out. But you still have $1 million in aggregate limit left over for the other insuring agreements. So if you have a regulatory action against the insured, or if there's a third-party lawsuit, you still have limit available to cover those situations.
Okay.
So in essence, it's $2 million in total limit.
Right.
Yeah.
Finally, the last question we have here is, how can a mom and pop have 20,000 records? Is that possible?
Well, you'd be surprised. I mean, it depends on the business, and it depends on what they're doing. And it also depends on how long they're storing information.
Right.
I mean, we have, $4 million revenue physician practices that have 4 or 5 doctors, and they have 30 or 40,000 records because they're storing information about their patients for 10 or 15 years. So that's one way, but it depends on what they're doing. I mean, if we're talking about like a little hardware store that has 3 or 4 customers a day, they're not going to have 20,000.
No.
It's really just all about asking and figuring it out and see how much they have. They might not have that much.
I think one.
But it's about making sure you know that. As their insurance agent, it's incredibly imperative that you do know how many records so you can properly discuss their coverage options.
I think one area that many of our brokers out there, we have a lot of nonprofit organizations that we insure, whether it's the YMCA, the any of these, and they all have so much records of information that they need to protect. I know that that's one area that many of our members should be looking at all of their nonprofits to help them with this.
Right. I mean, like the Goodwill, I saw a headline yesterday that the Goodwill had a big breach that affected a lot of their stores and lost a few 100,000 records.
Well, thank you, Michael. Those are the end of our questions. I appreciate the time that the people were on this call. I hope that it was informative, and I hope that many of them who are on here today are now signing up to get this to be able to offer this coverage to their customers and to new customers. Again, thanks, Michael, and for those that are listening, look forward to our next webinar. You'll, I'm sure, receive another valuable webinar in the future. Again, thanks, Michael.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.